All right, so let's get into our final article or set of articles for today. And so let me get it on the screen. People might be familiar with SCORE, which is a socialist group doing organizing around COVID issues. And I've been in touch with one of the founders of SCORE, and they're doing good work and putting out good messaging there. And so this year, about 6 weeks ago, they published this. It's called Reflections on the CPUSA Pre-Convention Discussion Document and its Discrepancies with Practical Experience, an open letter from SCORE to the CPUSA, dated May 10, 2024. And so it says the following is a response to the CPUSA's pre-convention discussion document, which can be read here. So, we are alarmed at the erasure of the lives and contributions of people with disabilities from the CPUSA's main discussion document of the 2024 CPUSA convention. This document summarizes the last 12 months of leftist organizing throughout the U.S. in response to fascist policies. However, it's difficult to tell which country this discussion paper is referring to, since the USA has not, quote, recovered from COVID as it expresses. Actually, the ruling class of America has demonstrated clear support in blatant denial of COVID, and CPUSA leadership is following suit. Despite active obfuscation and undercounting, COVID remains the fourth leading cause of death in the United States and directly contributes to the top three leading causes of death: heart disease, stroke, Alzheimer's disease, dementia, even possibly cancer. The working class, particularly Black, Indigenous, and people of color, bear the greatest share of the mortality and disease burden of COVID. This is in addition to the ongoing and significant increase in disability rates attributable to long COVID, i.e. PASC. 4 years of trying to live with COVID has resulted in over 13 million Americans having their lives changed forever due to disability from SARS coronavirus 2. At the January Senate Committee hearing on long COVID, Dr. Ziad Al-Ali testified that, quote, the best way to prevent long COVID is to prevent COVID in the first place. The path forward is clear. That's the end of that quote. All organizers seeking to mobilize the proletariat must keep the disabled at the center of praxis and work with organizations like ours to mitigate the risk of COVID infection. The focus on disabled persons is important. As a key component of the Reserve Army of Labor, disabled persons are very deliberately positioned as a threat, implicit and explicit, to the working class. One of the key actions we need our comrades to do is to make the connections that the destruction of public health and consequent ongoing and increasing rates of disability due to COVID are a means for the ruling class to weaken our capacity to fight back against accelerating fascism. Disabled persons have noted from the beginning of the present pandemic that past pandemics have led to increases in fascism. That is the pattern we are repeating here. The 1918 flu, combined with the many disabled soldiers after World War I, led to an increase in need for public assistance for disabled persons. This led directly to the eugenics movement in the Nazi Party, which was enthusiastically taken up by doctors in Germany, leading to the extermination of hundreds of thousands of disabled persons. Disabled persons are framed as a burden to the public and then disposed of under fascism. We will not allow this historic pattern to continue repeating itself. Disability liberation is key to fighting fascism. Communists in the U.S. need to see clearly how the abandonment of public health by the ruling class benefits the rich and powerful today, just as it did in Marx's time for the factory owners to ignore tuberculosis precautions. To the capitalist, the worker is disposable. There is no care for their safety or health except how they intersect with profit. Communists must not allow that same apathy toward the needs and dangers faced by our comrades. We can follow the clear science that has stated repeated COVID infection leads to increased rates and risks of disability. COVID dysregulates the immune system, leading to more susceptibility to future opportunistic illnesses, in addition to the impacts on brain function, cardiovascular health, and other vascular impacts. According to the CPUSA pre-convention discussion document, the statement, quote, the country recovered from COVID, is, unfortunately, bourgeois propaganda, a return back to consumer capitalism, a bitter, invented reality in the Parenti sense. The only sense in which we recovered from COVID is from an anti-human, anti-communist perspective that centers bourgeois economic recovery. The present circumstances evidence a new era of the disciplining of labor by the capitalist class. Boy howdy. CPUSA has a coherent analysis of these impacts while neglecting the cause and its interconnections. The bourgeoisie have successfully pressed America's politics toward fascism, and yet the CPUSA neglects to recognize that a key pillar of fascist policy is the dismantling of public health. This is seen in the quote-unquote ending of the COVID pandemic. The repressive power of fascist policies is felt in the social exclusion of anyone who does not have the health privilege to engage in a broader community. With this in mind, any organization which obeys the bourgeoisie propaganda, despite learning the truth about COVID, is complicit not only in disability erasure, but in the active maiming and killing of their communities and organizers. The unconscious capitulation to social pressures, this is exactly what we were talking about before, allows the reproduction of the fascist policies that CPUSA decries. If CPUSA continues to organize the way the bourgeoisie wants them to, then it is clear why we continue to lose. We also know who we lose. COVID overwhelmingly continues to impact people of color, the working class, and disabled people the hardest. The imperialist system does not value the lives of the proletariat, it consumes them through overwork and exposure to disease. This is no revolution, it is capitalism. It is critical that the CPUSA and the broader left prioritize the safety of our organizers and our communities so that we can continue to build the revolution that we so desperately need. Just like in Marx's time, public health is key to effective organizing. This is a call to action. Securing clean air is as critical as securing bread. Yeah, that's a very true statement. Capital needs us to have neither in order to maintain its power. From Marx himself, in reference to the Factory Act of 1864, quote, "It has been stated over and over again that the English doctors are unanimous in declaring that where the work is continuous, 8 feet apart is the very least space that should be allowed for each person. The very root of the capitalist mode of production, i.e. the self-expansion of all capital, large or small, by means of the, quote, free purchase and consumption of labor power, would be attacked. Factory legislation is therefore brought to a deadlock before these 8 feet of breathing space. The sanitary officers, the industrial inquiry commissioners, the factory inspectors, all harp over and over again upon the necessity for those 8 feet and upon the impossibility of wringing them out of capital. They thus, in fact, declare that tuberculosis and other lung diseases among the workpeople are necessary conditions to the existence of capital," unquote. Capital has deemed COVID a necessary condition in order to maintain its existence. Therefore, taking COVID seriously directly attacks capital. Let's say that again. Capital has deemed COVID a necessary condition to maintain its existence, insofar as it cannot do the things required to eliminate COVID, and it fears for its existence if it were to do those things. Therefore, taking COVID seriously directly attacks capital. It inspires existential dread in capital. Further evidence is in the recent actions of capital. It was the CEO of Delta Airlines who dictated that we should decrease isolation times in a December 2021 letter to the CDC. A capitalist changed public health policy, not professional analysis of research. The CDC has removed COVID protections altogether, relegating it to the status of other common respiratory illnesses. National precedent has now been set by the California Supreme Court that no employer is responsible for COVID spread at their businesses solely to avoid a, quote, never-ending chain of liability, unquote, for those businesses. And let me remind you that Nancy Pelosi in 2020 said that the Democrats' refusal to extend the benefits, which I think ran out in August 2020, up through the election, Biden only brought them back in January. They refused to do that because the Republicans, those nasty Republicans, were trying to do a slush fund and also get rid of corporate liability for people getting sick at their businesses. Well, yeah, we don't want that, except it's a joke that the Democrats were ever going to do anything about that, because this is exactly what we've gotten with Democrats in power, is no accountability for employers and businesses that allow the spread of COVID and contribute to the ongoing pandemic and all of the disability, death, and other harm. Capital will never protect the interests of workers or communities because the conditions of capital's profits are the conditions of our death. This is a critique toward the Communist Party USA. The party can only fulfill its mandate by acknowledging COVID, mitigating its spread, and organizing to bring that safety to all. If, quote, the role of the Communist Party is to bring issues of the oppressed forward and organize around them, unquote, then we must adapt the party to the present. One of the main sources of strength in the labor movements of the past was sharing a common vision, not just for the future, but for our present moment. Our present is characterized by COVID, and no amount of wishful thinking, neglectful politics, or elite pandering will change it. A party that acts otherwise only contributes to the continued oppression of the proletariat. When we ignore COVID protections in organizing spaces, the very air itself will keep people who know the consequences of COVID away. Yeah. We do not make a space safe by requesting safe behaviors. We mandate the behavior and enforce compliance. It may sound absurd to the reader to mandate masks to keep people safe from COVID rather than, quote, advising that people mask, but consider how we treat racist or sexually violent conduct. We do not request that members avoid being racist. We do not advise that members refrain from sexually harassing one another or assaulting one another. These are requirements to be in our spaces to make them safe for everyone. Spreading disease to our comrades can only harm our movements. Enforcing COVID protection, though, makes spaces safer for everyone, including immunocompromised, vulnerable, and disabled people. And you may not realize that you are at risk until after the COVID infection that gives you a chronic condition for several years or possibly permanently. The path forward is clear. Any movement or group that seeks to uplift the oppressed needs to center the disabled and mitigate the risk of COVID infection. We agitate for mitigation such as mandating masking, free distribution of disposable respirators, improved ventilation, subsidized upgraded air filtration systems, and free widespread testing. We must continue to educate on the pandemic as an ongoing, mass disabling event, and we must organize together to achieve all our goals. The path forward is at the center of our organization. For more information, or if you would like to work with us at SCORE, please visit socialist-core.org. So socialist-core.org. There we go. Socialist-core.org. So there are two follow-ups to this. The first one is a response to SCORE from a CPUSA member. So this was an open letter. Somebody, in this case Moshe Pinero, responded on May 12, 2024. Then we have SCORE's response to this letter, and that'll wrap it up. So Moshe Pinero is a member of the Communist Party USA. Oh, I should also add, this was published in Geese magazine, in case you're wondering where this is from. Okay. Who requested to keep their real identity anonymous. Okay. This letter was written in response to a letter published by SCORE on the forum on May 10. And that can be read here. That's the thing that we just read. So what is the response? The COVID-19 pandemic critically altered the landscape of many facets of social, political, and economic life in every single nation on the globe. Yeah. Feelings of isolation and discontent with the response from elected officials, along with economic precarity, prevailed in the minds of many, especially in the United States. In many ways, these ideas still dominate conscious and unconscious collective thinking of the masses of working Americans. The landscape of 2024, that is, the social, political, and economic landscape, would not be what it is without the events of 2020, marked by not only the COVID-19 pandemic, but Black Lives Matter mass movement and presidential election as well. And arguably, we had so much demonstrating in the streets because people didn't have to go to work because everything was shut down because of the pandemic. Because we really haven't had anything like that since, I think, and it really stopped, at least to the extent that it was going on, when people had to go back to work, when that was lifted. So, as I said in many videos at the time, there were just piles of bone dry kindling lying around of people's grievances. And, particularly with the racial injustice and the police violence and all that stuff. But there's so many grievances going around, and there's overlap between a lot of them. And then it was like as soon as people didn't have to go to work for a few weeks, people were out in the streets like tearing the country apart. That's how frustrated people are. So, yeah. Anyway, I think that didn't go away. Just people aren't capable of expressing it now because they had to go back to work. But it's still there. It's still there. Careful study of these events and the cascade of problems. But let me add, this is also a presidential year. We haven't seen anything like it yet so far, and we're almost into July. So something to note. Oftentimes there is an uptick in protest activity in presidential election years. We're not really seeing that so far. I think that is part of this lingering malaise and just the clouds hanging over. People are being squeezed so hard. They're exhausted. Some of that is just conditions. Some of it's people are literally not the same as they were before the pandemic. We never really took the time to grieve it or anything. It's just been like back to work, back to normal, back to normal, back to normal, which is just a form of denial. Anyway, careful study of these events and the cascade of problems that have arisen because of them is essential to understand the necessary political tasks before us for the foreseeable future. Recently, a letter from a collective called SCORE was written and addressed to the Communist Party USA regarding language used in the main discussion document for the pre-convention period, titled Forward Together for Pre-Convention Discussion. Within their letter, they state discontent with language used surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic. And let me just say, before we go into this any further, I think that I don't really see a reason why anybody in CPUSA, although they tend to be defensive about fucking everything, and very kind of cult-like responses to criticism, I find. That's been my experience with communicating with people in CPUSA on social media. Just it's very cult-like, shut down, and they start changing the subject and all kinds of other stuff. Do not take criticism well whatsoever, and that's something I've seen for a while. But I don't think anything SCORE said was really objectionable. They're just like, don't call the pandemic over. It isn't. Here are the reasons why. Take this more seriously. Now, why the response to this can't be, okay, good point, we'll do that, I don't know. But I don't think that that's what's going to happen in this letter. But let's see. Specifically, they take issue with the phrase, the country recovered from COVID, arguing that the country hasn't actually recovered. It hasn't. And thus, the CPUSA is ignoring that, quote, key pillar of fascist policy is the dismantling of public health. And yes, how many fascists have you seen denying COVID, doing anti-vax stuff? That is still ongoing today. Yes, that is absolutely true. While it is true that the COVID-19 pandemic still profoundly impacts poor, black and brown and disabled individuals most severely, and perhaps use of the word recovered can be interpreted as implying that the pandemic is over, that is usually what a recovery implies, yes, this critique misses the mark. No, it does not. It neglects to acknowledge some and this is just so fucking par for the course. CPUSA, get over yourselves. You suck, and it's time you start making changes, for fuck's sake. Honestly, just stop. It neglects to acknowledge some very critical information about the U.S. healthcare system as it relates to public health and ignores the overall political message that the document is trying to convey. Just fucking stop. Can you just take criticism for once? Seriously. The public health infrastructure in the United States has been abysmal for many decades. Okay, that is not going against anything that was said in the criticism. Unlike other, quote, developed nations, we do not have universal healthcare coverage, such as Bernie Sanders' proposed Medicare for All plan, which again Biden opposes actively, nor do we have something resembling the National Healthcare Service, which is the UK's public healthcare service system, also under heavy attack right now, and there's various public forums, people speaking out about that. It's one of the top concerns of people in the UK right now. The United States has a myriad of federal agencies dedicated to public health, such as the Department of Health and Human Services, and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, as well as publicly funded programs aimed at providing low-cost care to low-income individuals and families, such as Medicare, Medicaid, CHIP, etc. None of this is germane to the criticism, but okay. Unsurprisingly, since the onset of the pandemic, adult Medicaid and CHIP enrollment increased by a little over 40%. Well, yeah. I mean, also there were programs that were expanded, but temporarily. However, private insurance still reigns supreme when it comes to healthcare insurance coverage, leaving many Americans either uninsured, underinsured, or priced out of care despite being insured. And while funding for the CDC has hardly been adequate, increases have happened every year since Biden took office. Yes, they used that money to spread incorrect information about the pandemic and minimize the risk. So this is going to wind up being a Democratic Party PR response. Is that what this is going to be? Because that's what CPUSA is known for now, just basically being like a caucus of the Democratic Party. Anyway, these two facts, as well as others, what does this even have to do with anything that was in the score letter? That's like, I can't even connect the two at this point. Have happened, further validate the demand for access to affordable or free healthcare, which undoubtedly includes the epidemiologic character of the CDC as well. So while it is the case that the COVID-19 pandemic is still ongoing, well, rather than being recovered, and indeed requires more attention than what it has gotten, certain sections of the capitalist class have conceded some ground. No, they have not. When it comes to public health funding, generally speaking, there is no set consensus on this issue within the capitalist camp. What even is your point here? First of all, it's minimal, and the Biden CDC is still denying COVID in its way, just a bit more sophisticated than the Republicans. So basically, they're arguing that, like, the Democrats, while not great, are good enough, and blah, blah, blah. CPUSA, be better or stop existing. Those are your options. But for fuck's sake, it's so... why is anyone in this party? That's what I don't understand. Why would you ever join this party and stay in it? I don't get it. Anyway, the fascists within the GOP are itching for the opportunity to cut funding for and dismantle the very little public health infrastructure that does exist, which is evident by their history of cutting public social programs in general. So in that regard, it is true that it is a pillar of their policy. So again, fascism is only in the Republican Party, according to CPUSA. This is consistent with their hashtag vote against fascism campaigns that they trot out every fucking election. Their co-chair, Joe Sims, is a complete embarrassment in this regard. It goes completely against Marxism-Leninism. What is your party even doing? And I'm sorry, but this whole thing of like the locals are good, but the national sucks, that's not good enough, okay? Get control of your party or do something else, because your party is joined at the hip with the Democrats. So anyway, so in that regard, it's true that it is a pillar of the GOP's policy. While the CPUSA document in question does not specifically name COVID and public health, yeah, because, why would it talk about one of the main issues of our time as one of the main targets of Trump's GOP? It does state the following. Quote, the Republican Party is arguably the most dangerous political party in history. Its strategic defeat is a historic imperative. It is central to social progress. Indeed, it may well be central to human survival, unquote. So if you think that the fascism is just in the Republican Party, if you think that this isn't a system like good cop, bad cop, where they're both out for basically the same purpose, using different coordinated tactics, you're a fucking chump. You're not the vanguard. You are actually behind the understanding of a lot of people in the population. You're not ahead of it. This is ridiculous. At what point do the members of CPUSA say enough is enough? What is this? What are you talking about, the strategic defeat of the Republican Party? Just every election, year after year, you want to get more Democrats in? That's your solution? Where is that going to get you? The Democrats do most of the same things, but with different tactics and flavoring. And the Democrats, the top Democrats are all like, we need a strong Republican Party. They're part of the same system. They work together to maintain the system. Do you get that? The good cop and the bad cop, like one yells in your face, one gets you a candy bar. They are a team. They work together for the same purpose. In this case, it's to maintain and expand U.S. imperial interests. They're not separate. They don't fight each other. The Democratic Party does not want to see the end of the Republican Party. So this strategic defeat thing, what do you mean strategically defeat? What does that look like? What are you talking about? The Democrats, in order to do that, would have to ally with the left. They've shown time and again they want nothing to do with the left. they will lose rather than work with the left. Because the people that fund both parties do not want the left anywhere near power or even with the possibility of getting power. How are you calling yourself the vanguard of the U.S. working class? And this is your understanding. It's appalling. Anyway, very clearly, the CPUSA is expressing that the GOP, and implicitly here, just the GOP, threatens human survival through their policies of deconstruction, austerity. No Democrat would ever do austerity, right? Privatization. No Democrat would do any of this. Like, the Democrats aren't a fucking neoliberal party. Wake up. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? Why, there's a lot of different communists listening to this. A lot of them in the US. Why are we collectively tolerating the existence of this fucking stain on US communism, the CPUSA? Why are we tolerating its existence? Honestly, it's holding everything back. And limited government in general, which of course envelops their approach to healthcare and public health as well. And guess what? The Democrats are right there, part of maintaining the system. They will throw a few more crumbs in, but there's no fundamental change ever. Not only because of the nature of these policies, but also because, quote, the economic impacts of racism and sexism. This isn't even, this isn't on the topic of what the score letter was about. What are you talking about? The economic impacts of racism and sexism, such as ongoing wage differentials. For African Americans, they've grown worse since the start of the century. Housing discrimination, unequal access to healthcare and education, obviously have deeply affected those sections of the country's diverse working class. Institutionalized racism and misogyny are clearly hard at work. Okay, that's the end of the quote. True, but what does this have to do with the criticism? Can't you just say, like, yeah, my bad, COVID's not over, we'll change that line? Would that have been that difficult? But no, you can't do it. You can't do it. Through over-scrutinously nitpicking language, fuck you. Just fuck you. Fuck you and fuck your fucking useless party. You're Democrats. You're small d Democrats, just like your fucking Twitter account said. You're so fucking clueless, you're oblivious, and I think it's on purpose. The critics at SCORE have failed to understand that the CPUSA's Forward Together for Pre-Convention Discussion document is inclusive of their very valid concerns, which I've kind of just been shitting on, regarding COVID-19. Resolute ideological and organizational battles against political forces that seek to perpetuate institutionalized bigotry within healthcare are a threat to human survival and social progress. The necessary time and attention that the chronic and acute effects of COVID-19 pandemic deserves will not come about because a group of communists in the CPUSA or otherwise declare it to be a top priority. What is your purpose for existing? What is your fucking purpose? You're like, it doesn't matter what we do. Why do you exist? Why are you having a convention if what you say and what your priorities are don't matter? So first, they're nitpicking your language. Then the concerns are actually valid. Now it's like, well, we can't do anything anyway. Wow, it's mind-blowing how much you're contradicting yourself. It's a joke. Like, this is a complete joke. This party is a joke. It's a joke every time it opens its mouth on any criticism, on any serious issue. It's a joke. Have you ever watched their live streams? They're ridiculous. They're ridiculous. The CPUSA should not exist. Something needs to take its place. Fuck the CPUSA. I'm sorry. This is just ridiculous. Ridiculous. Mobilizing the masses of workers in the struggle for healthcare as a democratic right is the requisite solution. So now we're ping-ponging back to this. As the document states, quote, working class power is the only language the ruling class understands, regardless of the inclination of its various factions. Ruling class power only concedes to the power of consciously mobilized demand. But again, as a communist party, what are your priorities? The idea is that communists advise and give leadership and direction to the masses. We don't just rely on spontaneity and just document the results. So if you're not setting your agenda appropriately with the right priorities, you're not going to be able to give the right Anyway, this is just a refusal to admit the, the fault that is behind the criticism here, or that is the subject of the criticism. So anyway, that was it. Unbelievably, that was it. Let me make sure I didn't miss something there. That was a very abrupt end. Yeah, that was it. That was it. Oh my God, fuck CPUSA. Anyway, so this is the response to that from SCORE. It's titled First to Learn, Secondly to Learn, and Thirdly to Learn. CPUSA's Core Values and the Ongoing Pandemic, May 22nd, 2024. The following is a response to Moshe Pinero's response to SCORE's earlier letter to the CPUSA on their approach to COVID-19. All right, we just read both of those. So let's get into this. A CPUSA member recently responded to a letter from SCORE about the CPUSA's political line on the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic in their pre-convention document. This response ignored SCORE's valid critique and instead showed why communists are not organizing around COVID. There is a contradiction between how left parties, particularly the CPUSA, educate their members and members' vulnerability to bourgeois propaganda. This contradiction is clear when communists see through lies about issues like Palestine or mass incarceration, but fail to see through propaganda on COVID or vice versa. People in the imperial core are fed propaganda since birth, leading to linear, reductionist, and individualist thinking. Deepening knowledge and engaging in practice in the following key areas would help in overcoming this internalized propaganda. Conceptualizing the dynamic flow of the structural and superstructural processes that keep capitalism running is key to addressing conjunctural issues like COVID. In other words, it's a juncture of many different topics all coming together. Communists in the imperial core often see through one set of lies or one invented reality about issues like labor exploitation, the war on terror, or the eugenic ableist component of fascism, but they cannot apply, I'd say at least easily, that understanding to another set of lies. And they need help, and that's why the vanguard of the communists and our advanced theory is supposed to be able to help people. So anyway, a group may even know that mass organization is the biggest tool against bourgeois forces, but without understanding how these systemic processes are interconnected, their full capacity to effect change will remain unrealized. Blaming one party, the GOP, and focusing on elections ignores the deeper root causes of crises, especially the ongoing health crisis. Treating politics like a sport and not addressing root causes often leads comrades to miss the interconnection of systemic issues. Both the dominant parties in the USA have an identical policy trajectory in the arena of public health. Yeah, they're both neoliberal parties. Both fight against workplace protections and use health authorities for corporate interests. They implement great air filtration systems privately for themselves, but they hypocritically reject them publicly. This dismantling of public health was understood in prior socialist struggles, as SCORE mentioned in its previous letter, quoting and referencing Marx on the Factory Acts and Marta Russell on eugenics. Educating comrades about the state's pivotal role in maintaining capitalism is crucial to effective goals, strategies, and tactics. Praising the Democrats, a conservative party which serves the exploiting class, for increasing public health funding ignores myriad ways that those funds were misused. Yeah, I mean, for example, look up Biden, how much of the COVID money under Biden went to increasing police budgets. That sounds like something I made up, but it isn't. Like COVID money that didn't get used went to police budgets. That's a real thing that happened. And that's really consistent with, you had in 2020, people in the streets saying defund the police and some saying abolish the police. And then you had Biden in the campaign saying, no, we need to give them more money, more training, shoot them in the leg. Remember that? Is this coming back? I know it's hazy because we've been through a lot of trauma in the last 4 years, but that is what he said. And then the funding actually did flow in that direction, very consistent with that for anyone who would care to actually examine it. Oh yeah, it's the next line. I didn't even read that. So undermining the goals of the Black Lives Matter movement and now the Free Palestine movement by shifting them to police funding via sleight of hand. Yeah, that was exactly what I was just talking about. Downplaying COVID's danger, comparing it to the flu, or talking about the ongoing mass disabling pandemic as if it is over, which is again what the word recovery implies, undermines public health. Similarly, not seeing the state's role in indigenous struggles, climate catastrophe, neocolonial wealth extraction, the size and shape of the reserve army of labor, and many other issues actively undermines efforts to effect real change. This is really good. And, I got to say, I think that within the next few years, there's going to be enough highly educated communists out there who have been through real world discussions. Like Joe Sims he's not getting onto comments. Like if he actually just went out there and tried posting his bullshit, I mean, I'm using him as an example, but like anybody like him, he would get his ass pummeled. Like you just cannot go out there with that kind of revisionist, reformist garbage and survive. I mean, among communist circles, which is obviously the relevant, set of the relevant demographic. It just doesn't work. And so how is this guy able to stay in power and others like him year after year after year? It's incredible. Anyway, politicization of trusted bodies has undermined their credibility and effectiveness. In many areas, and especially with COVID, it is difficult to accept that respected scientific authorities, and especially public health authorities, have been used as political tools to maximize exploitation. Accepting this puts a heavy responsibility on our shoulders, to ourselves, our children, and our community. This can be painful, but solidarity is a salve. Through mutual education, principled struggle, reflective practice, and empathy, we can help each other to bear this burden. Yeah. Applying the science of revolutionary change and interconnection, especially analyzing appearance versus essence and form versus content, is a powerful tool. SCORE's previous critique was about internalized propaganda, not a wording mistake. We understand health is not healthcare access. Healthcare access is not the same as COVID risk mitigation, and access to the highest quality healthcare, or even free healthcare, does not determine whether or not someone gets sick. Misunderstanding the limits of reformism and electoralism reflects a deeper issue in understanding how the communist theory of change is applied. Change is not accidental. It happens when a group prioritizes and actively organizes for it, intentionally and collectively. An organization cannot change what it has not decided to fight for. And this is what I was saying when I was reading the thing, and he's like, well, it doesn't even matter what we say anyway. Okay, well, if your organization is ever going to matter, it has to pick priorities and set an agenda. If you don't even think that matters, why are you going to the convention? Something to do? Like your D&D group is taking that week off? Like, what's the point? Is this just recreation to you, or, a hobby? What is it? Reforming healthcare access will not result in a change in the mitigation of COVID. Yeah, because mainly it is about keeping the thing from getting into your body. That means making social behavioral changes. Holding a deeply incorrect political line without sufficient investigation and without having engaged in principled struggle is easy. What's difficult is to commit not merely to a temporary or superficial change, but to a fundamental change in how a party's shared values turn into material results and concrete actions. The state has completely failed on public health from a proletarian perspective and is not addressing this issue because it goes against the interests of the ruling class. For the reasons outlined in SCORE's previous letter, and to protect the health of our comrades, we must take this issue to heart. Activist group members must recognize that they are part of a community and have a duty to protect it, and that duty includes rigorous investigation and principled internal struggle. SCORE demanded clear action, and not on healthcare or word choice. SCORE was not asking for a temporary convention policy or superficial in-person meeting guidelines, but rather a fundamental change in the CPUSA's political line. Effective organization around this line would materially result in concrete actions like mandating masking, free distribution of disposable respirators, improved ventilation, and subsidized air filtration systems, and agitation toward goals such as masks in healthcare and treatments for long COVID. In the CPUSA and across the broader left movement, we must resolve the contradiction between theory, practice, and the propaganda which separates us from one another, not only in the fight against COVID, but in preparation for all of our future battles together. It just closes with a note. SCORE is an international organization focused on socialist organizing, agitation, and education, and centering the world historic COVID-19 pandemic. All members are also members in other parties and organizations, and their website is socialist-core.org, socialist-core.org.